Setup stock. In this video, we'll use inspect to measure a part and set up stock in a setup. In Fusion 360, we're going to start with the supplied dataset CAM milling setup. Before we move into the manufacturer workspace, I'm going to use the inspect measure tool to get an idea for the size of our part. I'm going to start by selecting one side and then moving to the other, seeing that we have a part that's 2 inches wide. I'm going to left click in the canvas area to undo my selections, and then I'm going to rotate and see how far the part goes from one side to the other, seeing that we have 7 inches. Lastly, I want to see what the overall height is, and I can do that by selecting one of these edges and noting that it's 1 inch. We also have another tool. If we go to Selection Tools, and select by boundary, we can select a body and get an idea of the boundary size for that body. In this case, 7 by 1 by 2 is the exact size of our part. When you're making a new part, generally you have extra stock on all sides so that you can machine it down to its final size. In this case, our stock is exactly the size of our part, meaning the 2-inch width is exactly the width of the part and the 1-inch height is exactly the height of the part. This means that our stock is going to have to be quite a bit larger in order to give us enough to machine off the sides. We're going to say OK, and then we're going to navigate from Design to the Manufacturer workspace. When we get to the Manufacturer workspace, I'm going to go back to a Home view, and I want to note that the units that are default in Design are different than the units that are default inside of Manufacturer. So to get started, I'm going to change my units to inch, and then I want to begin creating a setup for this part. A setup will contain basic information about the coordinate system location, the stock size, and parameters such as G54, where the coordinate system will be located on a physical machine. This is found under Milling, under Setup, and New Setup. It is important to note that Turning, Additive, Inspection, and Fabrication all have the New Setup box, but each of those will default to a different type of setup. So make sure that if you're accidentally on one of the other tabs, that you make sure your operation type is set to milling. We're not going to be using a machine at this point. We're simply going to move down the list and change our coordinate system, and we want to make sure that we set up our stock properly. For this part, it was originally designed in the Y-up orientation. However, our machine is going to be in the Z-up orientation. Our tool will be along the Z-axis with cuts into the part being -Z, and travel up away from the part to the spindle will be positive. So we need to change the WCS or work coordinate system orientation. We'll do this by selecting Z-axis and the X-axis. This can be done by selecting an edge, one of the default axes, or we can select a face or plane. I'm going to select the top face of my part and take a look that Z is pointing up, Y is pointing away, and X is pointing down and to the right. This orientation is correct, however, the location is not correct. To change its location, I'll set the origin based on a stock box point, and I'll select the box point option and simply move it over to this corner. This will represent the left side of a fixed jaw as it's positioned in the machine. This means that our X will travel to the right, our Y will travel away from the part, and Z up and away from the part. These are all our positive directions relative to the machine. From here, we're going to move on to the next tab, which is stock. Right now, it's defined as relative size stock. Note that this gives us stock sizes of 7.08, 2.08, and 1.04 because there's no offset from the bottom of stock. Obviously, this is problematic as those are not real stock sizes. So in a case like this, where we have a part that has a size that roughly matches available stock, we need to determine how much needs to be machined off and what stock sizes we have available. For this example, we're going to be using a fixed size box. We know that the part is 7 by 2 by 1, and we know that we need to have more material. So I'm going to set the depth to 2.25. I'm going to set the width to 7.25, since likely that's cut off of a longer piece of stock, and we're going to set the overall height at 1.25. If we look at this from the front of the right, we can see that we have stock around all sides of our part. I'm going to go back to a home view and note that this means that we need to machine all the material off of all sides of our part. This obviously could be problematic as we would need to have more than one operation. But in this case, let's go ahead and say OK to OK the creation of that stock in setup 1. Let's make sure that we do save, and once our design is saved, we can move on to the next step.